Hey there! Today we are going to be setting some faceted gemstones in the prong mountings we made previously. In order to demonstrate how to do this, first I'm going to be putting some images up on the screen here and going over the full process step by step and explaining what I'm going to be doing. Then I'm going to go ahead and get onto the ring here and set the gemstones right before your eyes. I'll be using a zoom in lens here to help capture each detail.
Okay, for this class, we're going to be using a 4-prong mounting here and a round gemstone. Now, one of the first things you're going to do is test fit your stone into the prongs, and I have this overhead view here to show that what you want is for the prongs to appear to be slightly too small for your stone, and that's normal, because once we have the stone in the prongs, we want it to flow into the prongs. In other words, we're going to cut out a little spot here for each of these, for the girdle of the stone to sit in each prong. To do this, you can use a number of different tools. You can use one of these two burrs here. I prefer the heart burr, but you can use the Kraus burr, I believe it's pronounced. You can also use a needle file if you have enough room to get one in there, or even a jeweler's saw. So the first step you're going to do here, and I have it shown using a heart burr because this is the most commonly used method, is to go ahead and you're going to cut a seat into each of these prongs using the burr. Alternatively, you can also cut them using the Kraus burr or a file here, and you just use it horizontally. You're going to want to match the profile of the stone, so this is where you're going to take careful note about how deep the pavilion of the gemstone is and how thick the girdle is, and make sure your seat matches as best as you can. You're also going to make sure that the seats are all even with horizontally, in other words, they're the same distance from the tops of the prongs. Next, in order to get your gemstone in the prongs, you're going to open the setting up just slightly, not a lot though. Once you have your stone seated evenly in all the prongs, the approach I like to use is to take a pair of pliers. These would be flat-nosed pliers without any ridges on the inside. And you're going to squeeze the prongs together from opposite sides, starting with one side, and you're going to angle the pliers so that you're pushing downwards at a slight angle on one prong. After you do this, you're simply going to reverse, and then you're going to switch to the other two sets of prongs and do each of those. After you're done, you should have something that looks roughly like this.
Alright, I have my ring secured here in my vise. This is a different type of ball vise I use for setting stones and allows me to pivot things around. I'm going to use the heart burr for this because I'll be setting a round brilliant cut cubic zirconia, which has pretty much perfect proportions, so it matches the profile of the heart burr quite well. One thing you do have to note is that very, very few gemstones have a girdle that is as crisp as that of the heart burr. Usually there will be some thickness to it, so I tend to just eyeball this. I know that the stone that I'm working with has maybe a 0.5 millimeter thick girdle, so I'm making sure that I move the heart burr up and down on the prongs, which you can kind of see here, make sure that the lower angle and the upper angle have a bit of a gap between them. Now you only want to cut maybe 25 to 30% into prongs, otherwise they're going to weaken. Then you're going to check stone, make sure it fits. If it's really close, then you should be about ready to go ahead and set it. At this point, you're just going to use your heel nose pliers, and you're going to lightly tip back just the tips of each prong. You're not going to try to tip back the whole prong. See here, just the ends. Now you're going to go ahead and put the stone in place. If it doesn't fit at this point, you just need to go back and remove a little more material. If it's lopsided, then you're going to have to figure out which prong the seats need to be cut deeper on, and just do that. So here I am, I'm tipping the prongs back over the crown of the stone. As I illustrated here, I have the prong set, or the plier set at an angle. And this ensures that the bottom part of the prong stays exactly the same, and I'm just nudging the top part forward. And each time I'm going to do this, I'm going to go around and do just a little bit at a time. I'm not trying to force the entire prong over all at once. You can also fine-tune this by using a bezel pusher. I have this custom bezel pusher that I made, and I actually put a rounded groove on the surface of the bezel pusher, and so it matches the profile of the prongs. It makes it less likely to slip. And I'm just going to nudge each prong so that the bottom edge of the prong is actually touching the stone. I don't want there to be much gap there. I don't want hair or clothing to get caught in between the prongs and the stones. So afterwards, I'm going to use this rubberized polishing wheel. This is the finest grit I can get. And I'm going to touch up each prong, round off the tips, and make sure to remove any marks left from my pliers. This is the point where if you want to shape the prongs, you can shape them as squares or claws or other things. Now I'm just going to lightly dust off the stone with this brush, and then we're done. All right, that was a pretty simplified version of how to set a gemstone in a prong. And I left a few steps out because I just wanted to get through the basics. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to take a really thick piece of sterling silver so I can show you how to fine-tune your seat cutting and prong setting, but at a larger scale here to make it easier to see. All right, so I've got this here set up in my vise because I wanted to go over this one more time here. And this is just a piece of 4-gauge wire, and we're going to pretend that this is a prong could be a 4-prong or a 6-prong mounting, but we're just going to focus on one prong here. And I'm going to cut the seat so you can really see here, and then show how to clean up and then finally finish up the tops of your prongs. So I'm going to be using this file here. This is an equilateral triangle file, so each of these angles here is 60 degrees. Now, most gemstones are going to have an angle between the pavilion and the crown closer to 90 degrees. So I'll need to adjust the angle of this in order to match whatever gemstone I'll be setting in here. The other thing I want to point out is that you don't want to necessarily put your seat right up here next to the edge, because you need to be able to take this top part and pull it back a little bit. So when you're setting a stone, I find it wise to put it as low down as you can while making sure that the pavilion or the culet, which is the point at the bottom of the stone, isn't touching anything. And sometimes I'll even drill a small relief divot down in the bottom of the setting, but not all the way through, to allow the culet to sit. I feel that hunkering the stone down in the setting is better than elevating it upwards. So to start with, I'm going to give myself plenty of room here, and I'm just going to go back and forth here. And I've cut into this now about 30% of the way. And let's say, for example, that my pavilion was a 45-degree angle from the girdle. That would mean that at this point, I've only cut a 30-degree seat. And I'm going to put an image up here on the screen showing why this won't quite work so well. As you can see, if the stone is deeper than the seat, you can cause chipping to occur when you put force on the prongs. So now I need to tilt this down so that this back edge here, it's up against my prong, is at a 45 degree to the horizontal. And go ahead and get that out. Now, naturally, if you have a square file, and I know that needle files will come in square profiles sometimes, you can use that as well. The other thing is, once you've got it deep enough, if you don't want to cut inwards anymore, you can use a file that has a safe edge. Simply tilt that at a 45-degree angle And then I know that I'm not cutting back anymore towards the prong end, which is a concern because if you spend a lot of time fine-tuning the seat, you don't want to get this too deep. I'm going to do the same on the top here to match the crown angle of the stone. And this is something you're typically going to do by just holding the stone up and looking at the stone, eyeballing it. And also just knowing that in general, a round brilliant cut is going to have a prevailing angle of about 45 degrees. It's actually usually a little less. 45 is usually a good starting point. I also know that this is a right angle. So if this is at a 45 degree angle, then this top safe edge here is also a 45 degree angle going up. So once I've done this, I'm going to look here around the side. Let me show you what I see on the side. Here on the side, you can see I've got a really nice crisp angle, but there's not any room for any thickness to the girdle. So I need to make some adjustments there. In order to cut a proper channel for the girdle here, I'm just going to use this needle file. Now, in a smaller prong, you can use a needle file or you can use a burr. But this gives me a nice, this is about 1 millimeter, maybe 1.5 millimeters thick. So by holding it horizontally and going across the prongs like this, now I have a suitable spot for the girdle. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Here we have a close-up view here. You see it's angled on the top and the bottom, and it looks exactly like the profile of a gemstone, and that's what you want to see. And that way, when you tilt this part backwards and then forwards again over the stone, it's still going to have a nice profile up the backside, and it won't look like the prongs been terribly bent in order to make the stone fit. After you have done the process of cutting your seat, you're going to want to clean this up a little bit. And there's lots of different ways you can do so. I do feel it's important to take out, at this point, as much of that bird material here as possible. And so you can do that by, a brush like this, which is just going to have some bobbing compound on it, is generally going to clean up most of your work. Because afterwards, once you have the stone in here, you're not going to want to do very much work around this area, especially if you're working with something small and something soft, like maybe you're setting an apatite or an opal, and you really don't want to scratch it up. So once your prong is prepared, then you can go ahead and set your stone, which of course you're going to do by bending the prong backward. Now see here, I'm gripping it right above the notch, and I'm going to force it backwards, maybe only 10 degrees or so. And then once you have got the stone in there, you can simply tilt it back forward. Now I do want to caution and say that when you are using pliers to position prongs, you're creating a large amount of leverage because of the length of your hand on the pliers. If you put too much force on this, you can chip your stones. So be very mindful that once this does not want to move any further, don't push it. Once it's in place, it's in place. Once you have the stone in place here, it's important to clean this up. Now, if you have a smaller diameter wire or prong, you can simply use these cup burrs. I don't have any that are big enough, but what you do is you just find one where the inside size of the cup is the same size as the wire, and it simply domes up the top real nicely for you. If you're dealing with something larger or you want a custom shape, then you're going to go in here and, of course, round it off by hand. Here's here. The other important consideration is just how far do you want a prong to stick up above the stones. Now, this would actually be more than I would want. So what you're going to do in some case like that is you have a couple of options. If you have really small prongs, you can take a pair of side cutters and just trim it down a little bit, making sure to leave yourself room to then create the dome. You can also use a jeweler's saw if you're dealing with much larger pliers. Now, I want the dome to actually start just a tiny bit above here. The dome is going to be, a half circle, so I need to go up about that far. So I'm going to start cutting from the back. I like to cut towards the stone, and the reason is that I am putting pressure on the prong. If I were to cut it from the other direction, this way, then I could be loosening the prong here. Okay. Now I'm at a point where you'd be rounding this off here. And this is the part where you get to have a little bit of creative freedom. Some people like a perfect dome. Other people like a little bit more of a flat on top. You can also, at this point, shape this into a different shape, such as a square or a heart or even a claw. Whatever suits your fancy and the design. Round is just the most common and probably the easiest. Once I have the edge rounded all the way around, that's when I usually go ahead and I switch to a rubberized polishing wheel. Depending on how much material you have to remove, you can start with a coarser grit and then move on to a finer grit, which is what I'm going to do here. Then, making sure not to hit your stone there. Another great thing you can use here are these barrel polishers here, like these ones here. You can shape them to match the profile, or what I also commonly like to do here is I find one like this. Check that up here. And then I'll take an old burr, or I use one of these shaping stones here, and I'm simply going to carve out the middle here. So I have this, and now I can put this on top here and simply polish it like that. If you do it like this, you'll see here that it's really hard to actually hit your stone, but you're still going to be maintaining a near perfect circle on top of this here. So once I do that with the medium grit here, then I can move on to the fine grit. And the ones I'm using, gray is coarse, red is medium, and green is fine. Lastly, I like to use a brush such as one of these, or better yet, a finer grade one. Here it is. And I will just lightly buff it with that. All right, so here's our nicely buffed prong tip here. In addition to buffing up the top of the prong, of course, you also would want to polish up the sides of your prong. All right, that's it for today. And I know that while I was doing the smaller ring mounting, I was using my microscope. And when I first got started, I was just using an optivisor. So this is a perfectly fine way to set most stones, especially if you're looking at around 5 millimeters or larger. Once you go smaller than 5 millimeters, for me, really like to use a setting scope. But for now, don't worry about investing in one of those. We'll get on to when toys like that are going to be worth the investment in another video. So hope you enjoyed this. Remember, I'm going to be uploading new videos and new series on a rolling basis, and I do appreciate your feedback. So if there's something you have a question about or a video you would like to see, definitely leave me a comment. And if you subscribe and hit the little bell, you'll know when I put up new content. So again, thanks for watching.